Hey everyone, it's about 6:39 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, August 30th, in the year of, we're told, 2023. I still have some sort of respiratory and sinus infection. It's not going away yet, and it's hanging on in a very irritating, pervasive way. Got one of my ears popping in and out, so I don't know. Obviously, you're going to be able to tell how congested I am. There's no way around that. And I may not be able to get out my monthly mailer on time, which should be tomorrow. Yeah. Simply because the sickness just put me behind on everything, really. For those who are on my Patreon, you know that I had to release even my most recent installation of the Reading Dead Sea Scrolls and Modern Scholarship at 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 days late. So, this is in regards to one of the topics that I've been keeping everybody on the mailing list appraised of, which is the progress of the document, which is a study of the word air, H2022, Strong's Code, air, as mountain. That's how it's always translated. Mountain, mount, hills, etc. So what happened was I had released one episode of the Aubrey Hours, just mostly covering cognates. It seemed to be the Aubrey cognates. But what happened was, as I went much, much further in this study, I found out so much about this root and the way that it's likely been used, and that we still use it today in a lot of ways that we don't even realize. And I had to go back, redo a lot of that information, and so I'm going to have to unpublish that episode of the Aubrey Hours and republish a number of episodes that actually go along with this document. The document, in the meantime, it's gotten very extensive because it had to. It's so unfortunate that a lot of these topics, that almost anything, and mountain as a topological geographical feature is, no pun intended, it's a big topic for sure. But even things that aren't, as profound a topic in any way, shape, or form is so interwoven with assumptions and trickery that the Masorah brings. Trickery regarding parts of speech and what they get to say about the, I would say, prefixes and suffixes, the articles that are added onto roots. They get to kind of claim that they can be sort of anything depending on what part of speech they claim a certain word is. And so many things get very convoluted. And so it takes a very long time on some of these topics to really successfully, and I don't know if I would call all of the things that I've done all that successful, because I'm really peeling this big onion kind of without a map, trying to get to the heart of things, the real meaning of all these things, And sometimes that just gets very complicated. So one of the entries that I had recently, in a couple of words that I actually have to go through and do a number of verses, examine a number of verses with these words in these verses to illustrate that they are not They don't mean what the translations, the gods of language, have deemed them to be. One of those words is ol, O-L, pretty simple root, and it appears in a lot of different variations. Ol, ole, olut, to ol, olit, just, But it's typically translated as up, to ascend. It's also translated as offering, burnt offering. We see it frequently used as offering and burnt offering. We'll see it in the same form, translated sometimes as like ascend or to go up. Same form, olut. We'll see it in the same form, translated as burnt offering. Things like that kind of make me a bit nervous about which one of those renderings, if any, are correct. And one of the verses that I had to treat as part of this study was in Genesis chapter 22, verse 2. For those who aren't immediately familiar, that's the narration of, as it's translated today, of Abraham being told to take Isaac to this mountain in the country of Moriah and to kill his son on a mountain that he's going to be told which mountain, I guess, when he gets there. That's the basics, okay? And the thing is, I try not to spend too much time on each one of these verses. If I'm looking at a particular word, I do try to contextualize it and then show if there's an alternate, how that alternate can fit without spending the inordinate amount of time that almost each and every verse would require, because of just how much chicanery and complications that these Masoretic rules and then subsequent English translations bring to the text itself. So before I go over that verse and the surrounding text of Genesis 22, I do want to read a small section from Jeremiah chapter 19. Now, before I read this, I do admit that just like any other section of the Old Testament, it could be poorly translated. There could be terms in here that are not entirely correct. I absolutely concede that, but I'm using it as an illustration. If we want to believe that Yahweh would tell Abraham to go and murder the son he was promised, that nations and kings and all these people would come from, if we want to believe that he was told by Yahweh to go and do that, which had never happened and never did happen in any other circumstance, at any other time, I think it's good to contextualize that with, for instance, this passage in Jeremiah chapter 19. Well, I guess starting in like verse 3, and I'm in King James translation. And say, hear ye the word of Yahweh, O kings of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Thus saith Yahweh Tsebaoth, or of armies, or of hosts, the God of Israel. Behold, I will bring evil upon this place, the which whosoever heareth his ears shall tingle, because they have forsaken me, and have estranged this place, and have burned incense in it unto other gods, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, nor the kings of Judah and have filled this place with the blood of innocents. They have built also the high places of Baal, to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. He didn't even consider asking these people to sacrifice their children. The thought didn't even enter his mind. But we're to believe back in Genesis chapter 22, it most certainly did. All right, so I'm going to read you the pertinent text. This is Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. And then I'll read you my study notes. So starting at verse 1. It came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, I and the lad will go ye yonder and worship, and come again to you. 1 ass. I mean, that's interesting. It's the singular with the ass, I guess. He was the only one who had an ass. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. So he's not being truthful with his son whatsoever, is he? If this indeed said in the source text what they say it says, after all the filters have been put on it. So verse 9, And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and beheld behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord shall it be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven a 2nd time, and said, By myself have I sworn, said the Lord, for because thou have done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they arose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So those are the pertinent verses regarding this idea in Genesis 22 that Yahweh, or let's just say in the Christian mind and Christian schema, that God, one of the earliest examples of how he was going to slay his own son for the crimes of others, that this was the first real practical demonstration of that sort of thing. Now, much of Christianity, of course, is contingent upon it. It's hinged upon this whole idea of Yahweh telling Abraham to go murder his son. To think about that. Try to remove yourself from the programming of being told what a good and marvelous thing this all was from the time you were a little teeny child. Try to remove yourself from that programming, especially if you have children, and think about being told to go murder your child. Not really something somebody's going to jump up to go do. Not really something somebody's not going to have some questions about. In the least. But let me go right to my notes. This again is part of the study I've been working on for a long time, basically for what seems like an eternity. The study of Er's Mountain. This is the section in which I'm examining, for one thing, the roots of ol, most specifically ole, which is used very often in conjunction with another word, irad, as ascending and descending, to make this word Er seem like a mountain. This is why these roots have to be examined as part of this study. So here we have this entry on Genesis 22:2. Now, I copy the entry in Obri, which anybody can check this with Hebrew. You just have to go to your Hebrew, read it backwards like they print it, and you'll see all the characters are there. And if you just love you the Mizora, there's plenty of softwares and printed versions of the Hebrew with the Mizora, and you will see that this is represented accurately, character by character. And then I, of course, give the King James rendering. And I highlight in red both the words that contain this ol root and the words that contain the er root. So in this example, we have two with the ol root, u, oleu, and, well, we have three, I'm sorry, and also le, ole, and ol. And we have one with the er root, eterim. Okay, and I've highlighted them here. In the red, it's and offer him is the first one. That's the English equivalent or translation. Next one, for a burnt offering, laole. Then the ol, upon, and then the erim, the mountains. Okay, let's keep that in mind. And here's the notes. So, there are a good many terms and grammatical pieces of interest in this entire chapter that cause a great deal of doubt regarding the story of Yahweh telling Abraham to take his son to a place he wasn't familiar with and murder him there. In fact, there's so many that a very involved study could be done just on Genesis 22. Anyways, I continued. A few of the words initially causing doubt are H5254 nase, tempt, from verse 1. I'm going to go back here. Verse 1. It came to pass, after these things, God did tempt Abraham. That part right there, tempt, nase. Okay. Elsewhere, this word, in this form, appears as entry 5375, nase, lift up, and H5127, fled. And this root's greatest occurrence is as H5127, nous, fled or flee. And one must wonder why any test were necessary when Yahweh already told Abraham he was going to make him a great nation through Isaac many times, and there were no contingencies on that promise. You can reference Genesis 12:7, all of Genesis chapter 15, where you know all of those blessings we heard from, they say like the angel from the sky, who might be an angel, might be Yahweh, because the voice changes in Genesis chapter 22. Those blessings, those are right there in Genesis chapter 15, already been said. He already told him that 7 chapters before. But somehow we needed a test to make sure. And then he tells him that he's going to do all that stuff he told him long before this. All of chapter 19, plus Genesis 17:8 and 19. Plenty of examples of Yahweh already making these kinds of promises to Abraham. Before any of this test to see if he'd withhold his son or not. Furthermore, even if nase does indeed mean tempt, here, the leading definition of tempt, and that's like today, just in general, the definition of tempt is to attempt to persuade or entice to do something, especially something morally wrong or unwise. So I don't think anyone wants to be associated with that. But even a more tame definition is to put to the test in a venturesome way, to provoke. But even so, even if we apply that tamer definition, that does not imply just to say to tempt him, to put him to a test in a venturesome way, or to provoke him to something. It does not imply murdering his son. Okay? Now also in verse 6, the translation tells us, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife. If Abraham planned to burn his freshly slaughtered son Isaac, even if Isaac were a strong, grown man, he could not carry the amount of wood needed to burn his own corpse. So I do not believe he put nearly the wood that it would take to burn a fresh corpse of any person of any size onto Isaac. You could not carry the amount of wood that it would take to burn your corpse. You'd have to put it in a big, big wagon. So that's weird. Now also, it makes it seem as though once they hit the spot where they left the 2 young men behind, they'd still have a good little bit to travel while trying to keep his fire lit for some reason. Now, did Abraham leave his only fire starting kit back at home? If so, did they have to keep that same fire lit for 3 days straight? Now, the text also has, it's just another strange thing in this text, an odd thing to consider in the text when we're considering oddities here, when we're considering the character of a God who's promised him this son and then tells him go and murder him. Now also, the text has this H3979 ma'akalat as knife, as Abraham's death tool. Out of the variations that exist for akal, the root, they occur about 900 times in the text, overwhelmingly as food or fuel. They appear 4 times as knife. 4 times out of 900 plus 4 times as knife, 2 of which are in this one chapter. That's strange. Now, another reason for one to be skeptical of the entire translation of this chapter, and this is part of the whole study, this air study and the peripheral words, okay? If not, by the way, if not the big reason to be skeptical of the way this chapter is translated, this is, as I mentioned, it's the fundamental narrative for Christianity. Christianity will nearly fall without this murdering your son story. It's fundamental to Christianity. Before explaining why the alt translation was chosen, it would help to demonstrate the inherent problems in using the same wording concept, establishing terminology for all 3 of these old root words we see here. Now, before I do that, I would like to ask one question now, since this is such a foundational piece of Christian dogma. If Christian dogma didn't have this, it really, if you want to try to form any kind of dogma or identity, you really don't have it. You really don't have the foundation of it without this. One thing I would say to this in question is, if the plan really was that because man had fallen, as demonstrated in Genesis 3, a story which is never mentioned again ever in all the law and prophets, the Old Testament. Same with Genesis 4. Those chapters and the events therein, which are again foundational for Christianity, are not mentioned again in the entirety of the law and prophets. But let's say that Genesis 3 happened and the immediate response was that Yahweh was going to eventually end up killing his son as a means to pay for the crimes of countless others. It seems kind of weird that he'd wait, about 2,000 years or so to get to Abraham, when he could have demonstrated all of this through Adam's firstborn. Why didn't he do it through Adam's firstborn? Instead, we've got this whole story about Cain and Abel, which don't really seem to add up to much anything, to be honest with you. It really doesn't. Why didn't he do that with Adam's firstborn son? Why didn't he promise him a son? So you're going to have a son now, but through him, I'll do these certain things and so on and so forth. And then when Adam's son, because we're talking about what? We're talking about the original people who fucked up, right? Why don't you do that through them? Do the illustration through them. Instead, we get this few verses of extremely abstract speech, extremely abstract speech in Genesis chapter 3. Again, is never repeated. And I will say this, if this was so fundamental and foundational, this Genesis 22 and almost murdering Isaac to prove himself and to really secure all these blessings, why is that idea never repeated again throughout the law and prophets? Not until the New Testament. Man, if I was Isaac, I'd probably be telling my sons how that happened. Jacob would be telling his sons. It would be like a tradition of how Abraham, their patriarch, the patriarch of patriarchs, their patriarch, almost slaughtered Isaac because he was told to. Didn't even question it. Almost went and killed him. And he was stopped in the last second and then told, now I know I can. Now I know. Now I know. Even though I've told you many times before this that I'm going to do all these things, now I'm for sure going to do them. Because maybe all those times I told you I wasn't too sure, I was a little bit on the fence. You know how God can be. God can be a little bit on the fence there when he promises stuff. Maybe not too sure if he's going to do it or not. Because, you know, it's God and he can be a little bit fussy, a little fickle. Ridiculous. So just real quick, since it's part of the study, we're going to just look real quick. Because there's those 3 old words. There's these 3 words. They're these roots, right? And the first time, and offer him. The second time, for a burnt offering. Third time, upon. Geez. Now, if we required the Masorah and the English translations to be consistent in their terminology and vocabulary, use consistent terms. I gave 3 examples of what it kind of would sound like. So let's just start out with consistently using up, you know, like ascend, up, because that's one of the ways that ol is rendered a lot. The first one would be, and bring him up there, for go up, up, one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. But now let's say offer. Let's stay consistent and use offer in these 3 spots. And offer him there, for offering offer one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Doesn't make any more sense than the last one. And how about bring? Because sometimes you use like bring. So we don't even have to have the upper ascend part in it. Let's just do bring. And bring him there, for a bringing come one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. There you go. If we expect consistency, and they have to consistently render these words, that's the kind of nonsensical shit that would come out of it. That's why they have to make up all kinds of different ways to interpret and use these words, because they cannot stay consistent, because if they did, we might actually start seeing a different story. So I wrote after this, none of these can be regarded as coherent. Even if the tenses and fine aspects of these terms could be finagled, we can't make the same idea in all 3 words work. And therein is the ever-present issue with consistency when consistency is demanded. By examining the whole text, along with surrounding chapters and comparing terminology, there is at least the distinct possibility that Abraham was taking Isaac to this place to set him up on his own, i.e., Isaac would begin to fill out the area himself with his own people, animals, and accoutrements. One reason for this theory is, after Yahweh blesses Abraham and then Isaac, verse 19, it reads, "So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba." This rather significant factor seems to always go unnoticed. However, it's very noteworthy when looking back on the earlier text of chapter 22. Verse 3 reads, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son." Verse 6 reads, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together." And verse 8 reads, "So they went both of them together." But verse 19 only recounts Abraham and his young men returning and living at Beersheba. In the following 2 chapters, Abraham hears of his brother having daughters. Sarah dies. Abraham's servant fetches Rebekah, and when she is brought to Isaac, he is dwelling in Eretz Negeb, translated the south country, which may or may not be south, but definitely is away from Abraham. Isaac, in fact, doesn't live with Abraham. From this section of the text, being Genesis chapter 22 and onward. From there, Isaac increased and became his own man. He became his own group. He is followed from that point on. Abraham didn't die. Abraham sticks around for a long time. Isaac is followed from that point forward. In the alt translation, the one that I provide when I look at a section of text, I always provide an alt translation. In the alt translation, land of Moriah was changed here. I put just the land, land the Myri. And here's why. There's just no textual proof that that's a proper noun. But given all the odd and varied ways that both mer and re or ru roots are translated, it was impossible to attempt to translate it into any noun that seemed quite solid. Myri was chosen just because it was a transliteration. Now, it's also possible, but not concrete at this time, that forms of mer, bitter, rebel, fatling, fatling, or forms of ru or re, watered or bath, could indicate Myri as a lower wetlands, maybe. So besides this one, Meria, the only other occurrence of H4179, which is this word that they're transliterating into Moriah, the only other occurrence of it is 2 Chronicles 3:1, where Solomon builds Beit Yahweh, or the temple or the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. And then here's the quote, "Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite." Besides the fact that the first Moriah is spelled E-M-R-Y-E, and the second as E-M-U-R-Y-E, there is no evidence telling us that these are the same place. There's no mention in the text of the significance of Solomon building there that was, quote, "This is the place where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac." The significance is told to us in that verse from 2 Chronicles, quote, "where the Lord appeared unto David his father. That's the significance. You would think if Genesis 22 and Abraham was told to go and sacrifice Isaac was such an immensely significant thing, that's what would have been mentioned if that was indeed the same Moriah. And this Murray and Moriah, it appears so many times in so many different entries, in so many different forms. There is absolutely no way other than just strict establishment dictation that would tell us that those were the same place. But we would certainly expect to see that as a leading contributing factor for why Solomon would have built this Beit Yahweh, house or temple in quotes of Yahweh, at this place. But that's not what we're told. It's not even mentioned. We also know that at the time, Genesis 22, that the Yebusi or Jebusites were already in the land, as per Genesis 15:21. Their chief city was Jerusalem. We know that from Joshua 15:63. This besides the fact that many believe that H8004 Shalem or Salem was Jerusalem from Genesis 14:18. So once again, and either way, it would have been occupied. This place where we think they're going to that seems kind of private, that there was this sort of private thing, if it really was the same location, because they're trying to link this Moriah in Genesis 22 with the one in 2 Chronicles 3, where Solomon built this house of Yahweh. That place would have been occupied even by Abraham's time. So it seems odd that Abraham would have left his young men behind in verse 5, assuming for privacy, just to go to a hill or an area we know had to be occupied or quasi-occupied according to the establishment Bible knowledge. Now here's kind of the clincher part of this. This is where I explain any other words that I might have had to alter in the alt translation and why. Whenever possible, I don't do that. The problem is, as I explained at the beginning of this, that in order for the Masorah's new terminology and parts of speech and grammars, syntaxes to work, so many terms besides for, let's just say, you'll have 1 or 2 terms in a verse that are super fundamental to creating a new understanding of that verse. Oftentimes, it's not just the 1 or 2 terms that have to be altered, but terms around them. Ones that we might think were benign. And then when we start looking into their Strong's entries, we can see, well, wow, this one word that seems benign, I can't figure out how this is really fundamental to changing our perceptions about all these things in the Bible, but man, it's translated like a dozen different ways. Well, maybe because it's one of those words that frequently had to be altered in the context of a particular verse or passage in order to make the really key fundamental bits of terminology they had to alter work better. So sometimes I have to alter these words back or give what I believe through comparison a better rendering of these words. So here towards the end I say, so also Asher Ebet. This is to be found in the original text. Asher Ebet, which is translated whom thou lovest, is changed below in the alternate translation to which I will give unto, which is a big deal. Here's why. because with this huge list that you'll find of establishment terminology as far as what Hebrew letters can be used where for certain pronouns, for certain verb conjugations, they change depending on the context and the part of speech that they deem that word to be. Okay? So if you look at I just scrolled back up here, the original verse, this Asher Ebit. So in their world, with all of their tons of ever-changing rules, this could be which you love, because in certain aspects, they could say that this is the verb love, and this T at the end can be thou or you, second person, when it needs to be in certain types of tenses or moods. Okay? And that's why they have so many damn rules, because then they can apply them whenever they need to, whenever it suits their ends. Okay? But you could take their same rules, and one of their rules is that if there is an A at the front of a word, it could be seen as a first person future, and the rest of this E, B, T is found elsewhere in the text as to give, give unto. I will, the A, I will give unto, as far as I will increase. And you can cross-reference that a bunch and find out that this eb, ebe, or ebet is used a lot in the Old Testament as give unto, go to, increase, which I will increase. So that's why I changed it to that. Now, while let's see, I already went over this, so I won't go over it again. So the adjustment to go and walk, this one last thing. Now this is big though. We're going to keep that in mind, this which I will give to, because of everything I just said. So this whole go walk thing, it isn't controversial. I changed that a little bit because what they did, we had two words here. We had ulak, lak, and they just basically dropped one of them and get the into, and then this eretz emeria. So I just changed it to something that was a little more paralleling the source text. The last thing. So as part of this study, I am using the idea of being whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole, or to be full, or fill, or complete, as the real root and meaning to this root word ol. Okay? So just so you understand that, the alt translation then of just this one verse, Genesis 22:2, would then read, and he said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, which I will give unto, and go walk towards the land Miri, or Miri, and he will be fulfilled there to fill full one of the areas which I will tell thee of. First thing is, using the idea of full, fill, or whole works in all those places we saw those ol root variations in. Secondly, for anyone who watched at least the first episode that I was making of this vertical flip series following the study of air, you would know that I already think that air is simply the predecessor to what we know today of as area, a space. Just an expression of space, area. So that's why area is there. It works just fine. So this is the kind of effort that sometimes has to go into this. I mean, I think it's already a 60, 70-something page document. Didn't mean for that to happen, but it's a little bit out of my hands because I don't think that it could be adequately demonstrated how this word air is absolutely not mountain without taking all of these necessary steps. And sometimes, like when we get to an idea just as important as Genesis 22, I got to put a little extra time in. But I think I've just demonstrated why that's so worthwhile. If we look at the factors just one more time, did Yahweh, God, tempt Abraham to go and murder his son to see if he truly believed him and wouldn't hold back anything from him? Or did he set him off on a little journey or quest, which still, by the way, this is the son of promise. This is the only son Abraham ever had with Sarah, his wife, not any other concubine or later wife. Would it not even, if we want to translate tempt as, well, something more like, what was the second translation? To put to the test in a venturesome way, or to provoke. To take him somewhere. To set him up there. And probably leave him with a certain amount of accoutrements and whatnot. And then to leave him. Which one of these actually fits all the surrounding context and all the evidence that I've provided herein? If you want to hang on to the idea that God told Abraham to go murder his son because you want to hang on to Christianity, because that is a fundamental dogmatic tenet of Christianity, then you're going to have to overlook the fact that, first off, Yahweh never asked anyone to kill their children. As I demonstrated from Jeremiah when I started this whole thing out, he said it never even entered my mind to ask someone to kill their own child. Someone could say, well, that's what makes Christianity just that more beautiful. Maybe you could say that. But you don't get to have Genesis 22. Because, as I've demonstrated, all evidence would seem to point towards the establishment changing the details of Genesis 22 to make it sound like Yahweh wanted Abraham to kill his son. If the whole idea was to kill his son in the first place, and I'm not right in all that other evidence I've provided, why didn't Isaac return with Abraham? Why the hell did he leave him there? From that point forward, Isaac's on his own from that point forward. When Abraham sends a servant to go and get Rebekah, and the servant brings back Rebekah, the servant brings her to Isaac. Isaac's not with Abraham. He's on his own. He's on his own. Yahweh built him up on his own. And then, I would imagine once Abraham perished many years later, that a great amount of what was Abraham's passed to Isaac, just like when Isaac finally perished, because Isaac lived the longest of all the patriarchs, by the way, about 180 years. his substance would have passed to his sons Esau and Jacob. But I submit to you, this is what we see in the text. Not murdering your son, but taking him somewhere else. Somewhere away from you. Hard enough. Hard enough. I don't care if he was 20, 30, 40. He lived with him his whole life. You know, we got this sickness where we want to just, because we don't give a shit about our children, we just want to fucking get rid of them like as soon as we can. As soon as they're 5, man, people are salivating, even before 5, putting them in preschool, then putting them in public school, and getting them involved in this and that and the other. They barely fucking see their kids. No wonder your kids hate you. You fucker, you're selfish. Doesn't need to be that way. Most people could function with one person working and the children staying home, homeschooling them, being around them. That's not why your children are always gone. Don't try to sell me that bullshit. Now, imagine a parent who really loved their kids and had been around their son decades. And they loved this kid. They loved this kid. And then they were told, yeah, to take your son, I promised you, because I'm going to increase him to this certain place. It's a little ways off. Abraham would have been kind of familiar with it because I got a really good idea of where it's at. It's near Bar-Lehi-Ray, which is one place that Eger, or in quotes Hagar, went when she was trying to run back to Mitzrayim. It's not that far away, but it's far enough to where you'd miss him. He wouldn't be right there. You couldn't just take a stroll over and see him. Hard enough. Hard enough. So if you want to make that word tempt, there you go. But murdering your son, I think in just the few details I've provided, it ain't there. It ain't there. And I think anyone could make a serious study on Genesis 22:2. And if you want to toe the establishment line, well, they'll make it real easy for you. You go right ahead. If you're just so stuck on your Christian dogma that you just la 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 la, fingers in the ears, well, you go that way. But if you wanted to really find out what's really going on here, could probably make an extremely productive study of just Genesis chapter 22 all by itself and find out that it's saying all kinds of shit that's way different than what any of us were ever taught from the time we were little kids. Teaching us from the time we were little kids that this righteous man was going to go and murder his son. He's going to go and murder his son because it was a just thing for God to murder his son to pay for other people's crimes. You know, with that, I probably shouldn't even made this long because everybody can tell I sound like crap. I feel like crap. It's pushing 2 weeks now. That super sucks. The weather's been terrible, by the way. Here in West Michigan, like when this started, the weather started dipping down super cold at night, like 50 degrees at night for mid-August. That's a bit cold. And it's been almost nothing but either overcast, like make your skin crawl weather in the days, or like blistering hot 90-degree fucking horror fest. Sometimes those temperatures without even the sun being out. It's like, I don't know what it's like. It's like purgatory or something. I don't know. I don't know. But I hope if there's other people that are really sick out there right now that they get better, because I want to get better too. And either way, this is a good illustration of kind of where I am with this and other things. If I'm a little late getting the monthly mailer to you, now you know why. And if you're not signed up over at the Patreon, you know, I do provide a reading every couple of weeks. Right now, it's still any pledge amount. And you have access to those audios till this book is done. It helps. Or just help in some way. Doing everything I can. So, till next time, everyone, I hope you're well. Take care of yourself. See you then.